My story started in Texas back in 1985. I was just a regular guy, just like a lot of people out there. I had 3 very successful businesses, and I was doing very well. And I had a wife and a little girl that wasn't quite 2 years old. I thought I had life by the tail. I thought that things couldn't get much better. I even was in real good physical fitness. I was running a lot. I was in, I thought, pretty good health. My mother died before I was even 2 years old, and my brother died at the age of 8. So I had a lot of death in my family. And I thought that since my father and grandfather both died of heart disease at a very young age, my father 46, my grandfather 36, and my father died when I was a senior in high school. And after that, I kind of thought, well, I probably won't make it to 30 years old. So I had this feeling all through college that I'll be lucky if I live to be 30, and I went through depression a little bit and this and that. But once I found out about running and getting into shape and doing all this, I thought that maybe this would be a way to keep this heart disease thing away from me. And I read a book about Jim Fixx. He wrote a book on running, and it was about how his father died at a young age of heart disease. He felt that with the running, he was going to be able to sidestep the heart disease. But one day I went to the office at my business and I sat down, I grabbed a cup of coffee, and someone brought me the newspaper in, and I sat down and I started looking at the newspaper, and it talked about this running guru that died while running. And I looked at it close, and it was Jim Fixx. Jim Fixx dies of heart attack while running. He was found on the side of the road, I believe is what it said. And I was just totally shocked. Here I am trying to be like this guy. It felt like I could run and basically eat just about anything I wanted and do anything I wanted as long as I did this physical fitness. So now I'm worried about, well, maybe I'm not doing the right thing after all. So I'm thinking about it really hard. What should I do next? Maybe I should get checked out to see if I'm really in as good a shape as I think. So I decided to go get one cardio stress test. So I went to a specialist, and this guy says, get on the treadmill. He got me on the treadmill, hooked me up to all these wires, and it's kind of like, let's get this thing going really fast, and the faster we get, the better I did. And he said to me, James, I think you broke the record in my office. He said, no one's done this well. You're in tremendous shape. At that point, I was running up to 60 miles a week and working out in the gym. I thought I was eating pretty healthy. I was eating a lot of salads and things like that, but I really was tired a lot. I noticed how every time something came around, I got it. If it was a cold or flu, I had a lot of sinus problems that I hadn't had for a long time, and I started to develop these maybe 2 or 3 years before this time. So my immune system was suffering somehow or another, but all I did was push myself harder. I read a book back then, it was called Eat to Win, and there was a guy that had a book out. I was trying to follow some of the things he was talking about in the book. But anyway, this guy went on to tell me how good a shape I was in, and he says, whatever you're doing, you just keep doing it. And he says, you're the picture of health. But he said, there's only one thing I could say to you today that I've noticed. On your back, there's a mole that looks a little different. It's probably nothing, but it seems a little different looking to me. He says, why don't you go and get it checked out by a dermatologist? I wouldn't worry about it. Whenever you get a chance, just go down to a dermatologist. He says, there's one down the hall in this building, and he's probably as good as anybody. So I didn't think much about it, and 2 or 3 weeks later, I went in to get it checked. So I go in and take my shirt off. The doctor comes in, he looks at it, and he says, oh my God, I think you might have melanoma. That's the first thing he said. And I'm like, what? Melanoma? Well, I didn't know a lot about melanoma, but I'd heard the name, and it didn't sound like a very friendly word. But I remember people talking about how people died of cancer from moles, and all of a sudden, my perfect world started to crumble. He says, we might have to remove a large portion of the tissue around your back in that mole. He says, you could die from this. We've got to really, really get after this. I didn't want any part of this guy after his bedside manner. And I said, well, I'll get back to you. And I left, and I said to myself, I'm never going back to this guy no matter what it is. I barely could drive home. I was so stressed out. I get home, and my wife says, well, maybe it'll be okay. I think it'll be okay. You need to get another opinion. Don't take this from him. Just get another opinion. So I went to another dermatologist down in Houston. I was living about an hour's drive north of Houston, and I went to a dermatologist that I'd been to in the past. I go in to see him, and he says, well, I think it looks a little suspicious to me also, but chances are it's probably stage 1 if it is anything. He said my wife had stage 1 melanoma and she's fine, and we just keep an eye on things and she's been fine and all that. But he says, I'm going to send you to a good friend of mine that is an oncologist. This guy is world renowned and he's here in Houston. If you have to go to see anybody with cancer, this is the guy. And if anybody's going to know, he's going to know. And I can get you an appointment. So he had his nurse call up and get an appointment right away. So the next day or two, I went in to see this guy. I go in to see him, and he says, well, it looks suspicious to me also. The only way we're going to really know is go in there and just take it out. We can do that right here in the office. I'll just take it out. And he took a big, maybe 2-inch square plug out of my back around that mole, and a pretty good sized chunk out of me. And he says, I'll get back to you in a few days. Don't worry. There's nothing you can do at this point. I'll get back in touch with you in a few days once I hear from the lab. All I did was worry, of course. I couldn't sleep at night. I was walking in circles. I was just a total wreck and I didn't know what was going to happen. It was almost 2 weeks before I got a call from this doctor. I didn't know why it was taking so long. I think I'd even called and they said, well, he'll call you in a few days. So anyway, he calls me, and when I answered the phone, he says, well, I got some good news and I got some bad news. And I'm like, what's that gonna mean? So he says, the good news is melanoma. And I said, good news? That's good news? He says, yes, but we think we got it all around this area, around the perimeter edge of this area. You think we got it all? And I'm like, okay. And he says, the bad news is it's very deep, and that means it's stage 4. Stage 4 on the Clark scale, which is how they determine melanomas. And he says the problem with stage 4 is we got to be very careful with this. There's a good chance that it's going to spread to other parts of your body. We're just going to have to keep an eye on it, and I'm going to have you come in every 3 months or so, and we'll check you out. We'll check your lymph nodes, and we'll see how things look in that area and all that. He says, there's nothing you can do. Just don't worry. Live your life. We'll just keep an eye on it, and we'll take care of it if we need to do anything else. So, of course, all I did was worry again. Now I have cancer, stage 4 melanoma, and I start to look around, and we didn't have the internet back then. So my wife had known a doctor, and he said to her that people with stage 4 melanoma were lucky if they lived 3 years. And I was like, oh my God, 3 years? This guy's telling me this? And I talked around town to people, and they said, oh yeah, I knew somebody that died of melanoma. And you're freaking out. So anyway, I went from a happy-go-lucky guy, an ambitious guy, a guy that thought he had life by the tail, to a guy that was totally depressed, not fun to be around at all, just a real total wreck, and just grumpy and didn't sleep at night and all that. But before I knew it, my wife couldn't deal with it any longer. And I think it was just too hard on her, and it created issues with our marriage. She ended up moving into town, taking my daughter into town. So here I am now by myself dealing with all this and didn't know what else to do, but I started to go out and run around with some of my old drinking buddies. So I started to drink. I went into places at night, and I'd go to these little places outside of town and hang out and play shuffleboard and drink beer and just have a good time while I'm there. And then the next day I would get home and it's like a bad dream and it wouldn't go away. So here it is. It's reality, but I wanted to make it go away somehow or another. But before I knew it, I was in the shower one morning. I found a marble, like a hard area in my groin area. I got really upset when I felt that, and I called the doctor's office. He says, well, come on in, let's look at it. I go in, he looks at it, and he goes, well, let's don't worry about it this time. You go home. If it gets any bigger, then come back. He's telling me not to worry all the time, but that's all I did. So I went back home, and before I knew it, the thing was getting bigger and bigger. And I went back in to see this guy, and he says, well, we're going to have to see what it is. I think we need to check you in the hospital. Let's check you in, and we'll get you in first thing in the morning. Maybe it won't be much. Hopefully it's just a little incision. So you come on in the morning. Well, I went into the hospital. When I woke up from the surgery, I knew I was in trouble because it wasn't a little incision. It was a whole area in my groin area that was just bandaged all up. And I had tubes coming out of my leg and all this. And I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't good. So before I knew it, the doctor comes in. It was the same doctor. He was a surgeon, the guy I went to originally. He came through the door and he says, well, I'm sorry to tell you the cancer spread. It's in your lymphatic system, your lymph, and now we really got to deal with it. I want you to do 80 chemotherapy treatments. I want you to do experimental chemotherapy treatments. Back then, it was hypothermia, where they elevate your temperature. And he said, we're going to need to do that, but we can only do 5 at a time. Every 2 months, you'll come back and do 5 more, and you'll have to be in the hospital for the whole week. The other thing is you're going to have to do a lymph drainage pump on your leg because you don't have any lymph nodes there anymore. And we've got to drain this lymph out. If you don't, you could get lymphedema and you don't want to lose your leg, and that could happen. And I'm like, oh my God, now I've got to worry about the cancer, the chemotherapy. He went on to tell me that I had a 20% chance of surviving 3 to 5 years if I could get through those chemotherapy treatments. He says, I don't know if you can get through them or not, but if you can, you got a 20% chance for 3 to 5 years. Well, that didn't sound too good to me at all. And he said if I didn't do the treatments, there wasn't much hope for me. Maybe I'd live a year. I don't know. He didn't say, just kind of insinuated. So here I am with this issue after the surgery and everything, and they still tell me that. So I became very upset, really depressed now. I felt like my life was over, like there's nothing I can do. What am I going to do now? I have to do what they say because I didn't know what else to do. Where I come from, when you get sick, you go to the doctor. And that's what I did. I followed up with the doctor. I thought I was doing the right thing. 2 or 3 days later, I got a phone call from a minister at a church that I went to. And this minister, I hadn't talked to him in a while. I wasn't a real religious guy. I went to church from time to time, and there was a minister at this church that I went to, and he was a really good guy, and he was an ex-professional baseball player. He was a runner and older than me. He was a tough guy, but really nice guy. And he calls me up and he says, James, I heard you had cancer and I've been praying for you. I just want you to know that right off the bat. A lot of people at church are praying for you. I just want you to know that you have got to understand that you got to fight. He says, I don't want you to give in to this. I don't want you to feel depressed. I want you to fight. I know you. You're a fighter. You're a runner. You can fight. You can push yourself if you have to. I want you to fight like hell. I want you to beat this SOB in cancer. He just came out and said that in the real words. I never heard the guy talk like this. It got my attention. It made me realize that I got to quit feeling sorry for myself. That's not going to get me anywhere but 6 feet under. This guy starts to tell me that if anybody could do it, I could do it. And you just get in there. So it got my attention. And I started to pray after that. I never was a big prayer. I said prayers occasionally, but I started to pray and I felt like every cell in my body was praying. I never had this kind of energy around me. It was a very calming energy that I hadn't experienced before. And I really did pray hard. About 20 minutes after I stopped praying, I got a knock on the door. And this friend of mine, he comes through the door, he's waving a piece of paper around, and I didn't know what he had in his hand, but he said, I heard that you were in here from a friend of ours. And this guy was a friend of mine I hadn't seen in 7 years from college. And he said he had an article in his hand. It was about a guy that cured himself of prostate cancer using a diet and a lifestyle. I didn't know anything about it. I said to him right then, I'm going to do this. This is what I'm supposed to do. I felt this inside that whatever he's got in his hand, I need to do. It was a strange energy. But this guy says, well, wait a minute, you don't even know anything about it. I said, I know I'm supposed to do what you've got in your hand. So he went on to tell me what it was. It was about a guy, and his name was Dirk Benedict. It was on a TV show that I knew very well. Dirk Benedict was this A-team guy that wrote a book about going across America, eating out of cornfields and doing all this kind of stuff. I don't even know if he knew for sure he had cancer, but he had all the symptoms of aggressive prostate cancer. And he was a young guy. He was from Montana and grew up on a ranch. And I related to him, being a Texan, living on a farm myself and having cattle and all that. I thought to myself, well, if this guy can do it, why can't I do it? And he talked about a diet. It was the Macrobiotic diet. I never heard of that. I didn't know what it was. But I had my friend go out and get the book for me, and I started reading that, and here I was laying in a hospital all drugged up. But I tell you what, I got very excited because now I had something that would give me some hope. If it would work for this guy, why can't it work for me? I'm a guy, he's a guy, why can't it work? So I got very excited, and I read that book until I fell asleep, and I just couldn't put it down. The next morning, I got another knock on the door, and it was my stepmother. She had a book in her hand, and this book was about vitamin C and cancer. It was written by Linus Pauling and Edwin Cameron. This book was written in the early 80s. It was about these cancer people that were terminally ill, and as long as they were on high-dose vitamin C, a lot of them survived for quite a while. And when they get off of it, some of them would die. Well, I didn't have any knowledge about vitamin C. I knew what vitamin C was, but didn't know much about it. But I got excited because I said right then, if it'll work for them, why won't it work for me too? Same thing. I felt that. So now I had two things, two weapons. I was going to do the macrobiotic diet. I was going to do the vitamin C and chemotherapy too, because that's all I knew to do. I thought a little's good, a lot's better. I'll do it. I got very excited. Now I had this hope. Well, the next day, it's a strange thing. It was like 3 days in a row. I got another knock on the hospital room door. And here comes a guy through the door. He introduced himself to me and he says, I'm the hospital psychotherapist. I hear that you've been very depressed and down and out, and I wanted to come talk to you, see if I could just talk with you. Is that okay? And I said, yes. And he says, I'll come back first thing in the morning. So he comes back first thing in the morning and he says to me, good morning. And I said, listen, I want to ask you a question. Do you know anything about something called macrobiotics? And he says, hold on a minute. And he starts going towards the door. And I thought, well, is he leaving? Did I say the wrong thing? What's going on here? He goes over the door across the hospital room, shuts the door tight, comes back over, sits down, and he says, yes, I have heard of macrobiotics, but I won't tell you what I know until you promise me that you will not tell a soul. You won't tell anybody that I talked to you about this. They won't take it very lightly here at this hospital if I tell you anything like this. I'll lose my job, my retirement pension, all that. I don't want to do that. I've been here too long to lose that. Will you promise me? And I said, yes, of course. And he says to me, I've heard a lot of good things about this diet. It's helped a lot of people. I've talked to people that have survived cancer with using this diet. It takes a lot of work though. You got to dedicate yourself. You've got to really take the bull by the horns. You've got to roll up your sleeves. You cannot cut corners with this. I couldn't do it because I don't have that kind of discipline. I even tried it a little bit and I thought it was tasty and all that, but I just couldn't stick with it. But I think it could work for someone. By the way, you don't seem that depressed after all. You seem like a different person than what I heard about. I thought I was going to come in and the guy was totally down and out. You're not. I think that you're looking for something. And if you're looking for something, I think this could really make a difference and really help you. But remember, you can't cut corners. You got to do it the right way. There's a right way and a wrong way. And if you do it, I think it can really help you. So now I'm really, really excited because here's this guy coming in secret telling me all this. I really thought I was on to something. He even gave me 2 other books to go read. And I eventually got those books and got excited because it was about a doctor that cured himself of cancer with a macrobiotic diet, of terminal cancer. I made up my mind right then I was going to get on that macrobiotic diet as soon as I got out after those chemotherapy treatments. And before I knew it, I recovered enough in there to get those treatments. So I got the chemotherapy treatments and they were terrible. They'd elevate your temperature and you're like freezing to death. Your temperature is so high. They had weighted blankets on me. I was shaking in bed. Once you get that, it really made you sick. It was terrible. It was like having the flu several times over. It was really bad. So I made it through that somehow, that whole 3 weeks in the hospital. And I went home and tried to get on the macrobiotic diet. I did start, but I had to recover from the surgery. I couldn't hardly get around. I couldn't hardly walk. And it was like when you get your whole groin ripped open like that, it's very hard to get around for a while. But I was so determined to do whatever it took to get well. And before I knew it, it was 2 months later, I had to go back to the hospital for another 7 days. So I go back to the hospital. I'm in the hospital. They must have doubled or tripled it because it was so bad. I'd never been so sick in my life. I couldn't eat. I was throwing up. It was awful. And I was already really thin after the surgery and the first chemotherapy treatments. And now they're giving me this. And I remember laying there. I was so weak. I felt like I was almost dead, just no life in me. I was laying there almost unconscious. And I remember them patting me down and wetting me down with all this stuff. And I said right then, I got to get out of this place. They're going to kill me in here. Because every night I would hear people die down in the hallways at night. And I would find out that these people were dying of pneumonia. I knew that I couldn't stay on this macrobiotic diet if I kept doing this stuff. It just wasn't going to work for me. I knew I couldn't mess around because when you have cancer, you don't mess around. But what I did was I had people bring me meals. There was a macrobiotic center there in Houston, and I would have them bring me meals, but I couldn't even eat. I couldn't keep it down. I hadn't done any vitamin C yet, but I started out with that, and I was trying to recover from the surgery. So then what I decided to do 2 nights later, I could barely get out of bed. I was so weak. I got my jeans on, and I crawled out of the hospital, basically. I snuck down the hallway at 2 a.m. The nurse station was down there. I'm looking down this way. No one's out there, right? I knew it was quiet about that time at night. So I snuck down the hallway, and here I am sick. And I went down the stairway, and I remember just like hanging on. And I got in my car that had been in that parking lot and drove out and went to my stepmother's house because she lived an hour away. It took me a while to get that chemo out of my system enough to where I felt halfway decent. But I'll tell you what, that's when the healing I felt really started, because now I'm going on the vitamin C, I'm doing the macrobiotic diet, I'm going all out, and I'm not going to cut any corners. Like the guy said, don't cut corners. I'm going to set the example for what I'm doing. When I got the vitamin C, I could tell after 3 months or so, I felt like a different person. I felt like I was high on the food I was eating. I started to feel alive again. I can't explain it. I started to feel like I was putting something good into my body, and I felt like the energy was changing. The macrobiotic diet is a diet that consists of around 50% whole organic grains. Most of them were freshly hulled grains. We had a hulling machine. We ate a lot of brown rice, short grain brown rice. We hulled ours before it was cooked, and we did that a lot, but there was 50% grains and 25% or so vegetables, and the majority of these vegetables were all the cancer-killing vegetables. The cruciferous vegetables were a huge part of it because we ate so many vegetables. Some were raw, some were cooked, some were pressure cooked, sauteed, different methods. But we had that, and then we had 10% of soups every day. The soups we had were like miso soup. I had miso soup twice a day, and we were eating miso soup because this was good for our intestinal flora. 70-80% of your immune system is from the gut flora. It also consisted of 10% beans, like lentils, aduki beans. We had other ones too, but these were our mainstay beans, the beans that we ate the most. We'd have split peas and other beans for protein. We also ate about 5% seaweed every day. We had wakame, kombu, and all those seaweeds that we had, but the wakame was usually in our miso soup. But these are very high in minerals and anti-cancer properties. We did everything. We had nuts and seeds and other condiments, and we didn't drink a lot. We had so much water in the food. We would drink tea, twig tea, bancha tea, things like that. I even discovered something called Iscador, which was mistletoe injections. I was willing to do whatever it took, and I feel to this day that the macrobiotic diet saved my life.